Ben told me the radio was broken. The receipt he never meant me to see described it as fully operational, tested on air, $1,250, cash, 9 days after our father's funeral. He had the house. He had the limited cleanout authorization with my name signed at the bottom of it. And he had 5 days before the workshop stood empty. I spent 31 years as an attendance clerk, matching half-written names against dates until the pattern showed itself. So when I found my father's logbook folded into the equipment manual, 14 call signs, every Sunday, 7 minutes apart, I did what I always did. I counted. One call sign appears more than any other. The man who holds it told me he had never needed anything from Frank Porter and hung up before I could ask him a second question. The check marks continued through the last week Dad was alive. One column was labeled "No Answer." Behind the removed page, folded once, was a sheet carrying my name and my brother's. The buyer had not resold it. That much I could confirm in an afternoon. Everything else started with what I signed in April without reading. I drove up from Des Moines on the 13th of October, a Monday. Ben's truck was not in the driveway, which is the only reason I went inside. The workshop is the old single garage behind the house. The shelf above his bench ran the length of the north wall, and there was a rectangle on it where the dust stopped. 16 inches by 9, near enough. The coaxial cable was coiled on a nail with the end taped, the way he taped everything, and the tower was still standing out back with the wire running off it toward the walnut tree. I called my brother from the bench. He said, "Sold it. Fellow loaded it out this morning." I asked him what he got. $1,250. Cash. A pause, and then the part he had ready. "It was junk, Elaine. Hadn't worked right in years. And you signed the paper." I had. I said so. Then I asked whether the thing had ever done anything for anybody. "I never needed a thing from him," Ben said, "and neither did anybody else. It was a hobby. He sat out there and talked to strangers. He told me the hauler was coming Saturday for whatever was left. 5 days. Then he was off the line. The way he has been getting offline since we were children. The manual was on the shelf underneath, a fat blue thing with a rubber band around it. Inside the front cover was a spiral notebook, the narrow kind, and I opened it standing up because I did not expect it to take long. It took the rest of the morning. Every page was ruled into 4 columns in my father's hand. Time, call sign, a check mark, and a narrow 4th column at the right edge, headed "No Answer," mostly empty. The times were what stopped me. 7 o'clock, 7:07, 7:14, 7:21. 14 entries, 7 minutes apart, every Sunday evening, the same 14 call signs in nearly the same order, week after week, back through the winter and into the spring. That is not a hobby. I have read attendance sheets for 3 decades, and I know the difference between people who wander in and people who are expected. The check marks ran through the 28th of September. My father died on the 30th. The last page in the notebook had been torn out. The spiral still held the paper teeth. Folded into the back cover was a single sheet, typed on his old machine, 2 columns of names with mine and Ben's at the top. I looked at it for about 4 seconds, decided it was a Christmas list, put it in my handbag, and went back to the part I understood, which was the money. The listing was still up on a marketplace page, marked sold. Collins Station, working, tested on air. The buyer's number was in the ad. His name was Terry Holloway, out past Waterloo, and he was polite about a stranger calling him at lunch. $1,250, cash, picked up that morning at 8. No, he had not resold it. That was the one thing I could nail down that day, and I wrote it on the back of a gas receipt. Then I sat in the truck with a notebook and did what a clerk does. I tallied 38 Sundays in that book. One call sign appeared 51 times, which meant it was showing up on days that were not Sunday. Xero erceja. I sat there long enough for the windows to fog, because I had seen those 4 characters before, in white vinyl, on the back window of my brother's work truck. Terry Holloway ran a heating and cooling parts counter for 20 years before he retired, which I did not know when I drove out there Wednesday, and which explains a great deal about how he and my brother ended up in the same room. He met me in the driveway. 60-something. Work boots. The kind of man who says the whole truth in one go, because he has never had a reason not to. "You're the sister," he said. "We're co-heirs," I said. "I'm trying to find out what left the house." He went inside and came back with a folder. Not a shoebox. A folder with a bill of sale in it, handwritten but complete, and a copy for me because he had made 2 at the time. Collins receiver and transmitter, power supply, hand microphone, and 2 spare tubes. $1,250, cash, paid the 13th of October. And down at the bottom, in my brother's square capitals, a line he must have written without thinking about it at all. Condition, fully operational, tested on air by seller. I read it twice. My brother had told me it hadn't worked right in years. He put it on the air right there in the shop, Holloway said. Talked to a fellow in Missouri for 2 minutes. Rig like that with a bad final is a boat anchor. I asked him when my brother first got in touch. Ad went up the 5th. I remember because it was a Sunday, and I thought, well, somebody's cleaning out an estate. He said it without any weight on it at all. We buried our father on the 4th. There are things you do not want the arithmetic on, standing in a stranger's driveway on a Wednesday, and I did the arithmetic anyway. I asked him about a notebook, a spiral one or a loose page out of one. There wasn't a page. If there'd been a page, I'd have kept it. Log pages are worth something to a fellow like me. He handed the manual back to me too, said he had that on a disc. Then he said the thing that made the rest of it necessary. He told me the whole net was done, said his dad had passed and everybody already knew. I said, what net? His face changed. The way a man's face changes when he understands he has said the second sentence to somebody who never got the first. 3940, Sunday evenings. I only ever listened. I'm not out that far. I've got neighbors on both sides. He rubbed the back of his neck. There's people out on the county roads that don't. Driving home, I stopped at the lawyer's office in Cedar Falls and asked for a copy of the draft inventory Ben had given him. I am entitled to it. That is not detective work. That is being a beneficiary with a pen. That inventory listed the truck, the house, 2 savings accounts, a rider mower, and a coin collection worth about $40 that our mother started in 1971. No radio, no $1,250. One line for miscellaneous shop contents, valued at $300 disposed. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with the notebook under a lamp, turning it so the light came in low across the surface, which is a trick you learn when parents forge signatures on absence notes. The page under the torn-out one held the ghost of it. My father pressed hard. He always pressed hard, and he never learned to lift his hand. Down the left side of the missing page, in a column, he had written initials, sets of 2 and 3 letters, indented the way he indented everything, and beside a few of them, a small arrow. I got a soft pencil and shaded it out the way a child does a coin rubbing. 14 sets of initials. And at the bottom, pressed deeper than the rest, because he had gone over it twice, a 15th line that was not initials at all. It was a phone number, and it was mine. A call sign is public. That surprises people. You can type 5 characters into a license lookup, and it will hand you a name and a mailing address, because the license is a license, the same as a plumber's, and anybody who has ever gotten on the air knows it. So I did not have to be clever. I had to be patient, and I had to be willing to sit at a kitchen table for 2 days with a notebook, a laptop my daughter set up for me, and my father's address book, which he kept in a green vinyl cover with a rubber band around it, because everything in that house had a rubber band around it. 14 call signs. 11 of them came back with a name and a rural route address inside 40 minutes. 2 came back with names but post office boxes. 1 came back with nothing at all, which I set aside. Then I opened the address book and started matching the way I used to match a bus note that said J. Ramirez, 3rd grade, against 640 enrolled students. Dale Ruzicka, out past Dunkerton. Marjorie Hoyt, LaPorte City. Wendell Byers, a rural route south of Hudson, with the word gravel written beside it. Corinne Duffy, Harold Stang, Delbert Novak, and beside Delbert's name, in my father's hand, the words Patty Calls Tuesdays. Patty Nemmers was not a call sign. Patty Nemmers had a phone number and no license. That was the first thing that did not fit, and it took me most of Thursday to see what it meant. There were 2 lists in that address book. One was the licensed operators, the people who could talk to my father on their own equipment. The other was shorter, 6 names, ordinary telephone numbers, and every one of them sat beside somebody on the first list. A wife, a son in Waverly, a neighbor a mile and a half up the road. My father had built a backup. If the radio did not reach somebody, the telephone would reach somebody who could go look. I had assumed, without ever once examining the assumption, that my father spent his Sunday evenings talking about the weather with people he would never meet. That is what I had told my own daughter for years. Your grandpa on his radio. I got out an Iowa map, the paper kind, and marked the 11 addresses. They were not scattered. They ran in an arc, south and east, out where the county roads stop being paved and the towers thin out. There are stretches out there where a cell phone shows one bar and then shows nothing. And if you are 84 years old and the furnace quits on a Sunday night in February, a telephone in a house with a dead landline is a decoration. Every single person on that map lived alone or lived with someone they were taking care of. I called Marjorie Hoyt first because she was closest and because women of a certain age will tell a stranger the truth if the stranger says her father's name in the first sentence. She said, "Oh, honey." Then she was quiet for a second. We wondered. I asked what she meant. Nobody said anything. The Sunday after, there was nothing on. Then the next Sunday, there was nothing on. Dale got on and called for a while, and then he stopped. She said it evenly. "The way you say things you have already made your peace with." I figured somebody would ring us. Nobody had rung them. 2.5 weeks, 14 households, and nobody had rung them. I told her I was sorry. I meant it more than I expected to. Then Marjorie said, "Your brother will know how it all went. He was there the first night we ever ran it. Sat right there at Frank's bench with a legal pad." Marjorie Hoyt is 81 and keeps her radio on a card table beside the recliner, so she does not have to get up for it. She made coffee I did not want and told me how the thing actually worked, and I wrote it down, because by then I had stopped trusting my own summary of anything. 7 o'clock. My father called the net. Then he went down the list in the same order every week, one station at a time. And he gave each one about 7 minutes, which sounds like nothing until you understand that 7 minutes is long enough for a person to say the second thing. "The first thing's always fine," Marjorie said. "You have to sit there a bit before anybody tells you the truth." If a station did not answer, he marked it. That was the fourth column. He never made a fuss about it on the air, because half the county could hear, and my father would have died before he embarrassed anybody in public. That turned out not to be a figure of speech. After the net, he made a phone call. Not to the person, to the person's name on the second list. The neighbor, the daughter in Waverly, Patty Nemmers, who called Delbert on Tuesdays anyway. And if that call did not settle it, somebody drove. 3 times in 6 years, somebody drove, Marjorie said. Twice it was nothing. Once it wasn't. Wendell Byers is the once it wasn't. He is 84, lives at the end of a gravel road south of Hudson, and has a face like a fence post. He did not want me in the house, and then he did, and he talked for 1 hour and 10 minutes while a dog leaned on my leg. February 2 years ago, his furnace quit at about 4 in the afternoon, and by 7 he was in a chair under 3 quilts, not thinking as clearly as he thought he was. He missed the net. Frank called the neighbor, who was in Cedar Rapids at his daughter's. So Frank called the second name, a young couple 2 miles over who had been on the list 4 months and had never once been used. "Fella was in my kitchen by 8:30, Wendell said. "Told me get up, we're going to town." I said I'm fine. He said, "Sir, I'm not asking you." I asked him what he would have done without it. "Sat there," he said. He looked out the window at a machine shed. "You get cold and it gets to be a lot of trouble to stand up. That's the whole thing." That is the part I had never once considered in 5 years of telling people my father had a hobby. Dale Ruzicka was the third, and Dale is the one who corrected me on the thing I had gotten wrong in a way that mattered. I had walked in thinking of my father as the man in the middle, the organizer, the one who took care of 13 people. "No," Dale said. "It wasn't his. He'd get sore if you said that. Nobody paid anything. No dues, no officers, no club. My father would not take $1 for the electricity, and he told them repeatedly that he was not in charge of anybody, and that the list belonged to all of them. He said one man running it is how it dies," Dale said. Said we already knew that. I asked what he meant by already. Dale got up, went to a roll-top desk, and came back with an index card. Soft at the corners, the way paper gets when it has lived in a wallet. He gave us all one of these when we started. Your name, your call, and the 2 people you're supposed to raise if you can't raise the net. He handed it to me. At the bottom, under Dale's own name, in my father's block letters, was the third contact. Not a neighbor, not a relative of Dale's, K0RCH. And under it a telephone number I have had in my address book for 11 years and have dialed, by my own honest count, about 6 times a year. It is my brother's. I had told myself the 14th call sign came back empty from the license lookup. That was not true, and I knew it was not true by Friday morning. I had typed the letter O where the 0 belonged. It is the single most common error in any handwritten record in the United States. I have corrected it in other people probably 4,000 times, and I let it sit for 2 days because I did not want the screen to say what it said. I typed it right at 9 in the morning at my own kitchen table with the coffee going cold. Benjamin F. Porter, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Technician, upgraded to general. First licensed 6 years ago in November under a call sign the computer picks out of a hat, and then, the following April, changed by application to K0RCH. You can ask for the letters you want if nobody has them. He asked for those. Rachel died in the March before that November. She was 56. There was a period of about a year afterward when Ben answered nothing. And I want to be accurate about my own conduct here because I have been giving myself credit I did not earn. I called him twice a week for the first month, then once a week, and when he stopped picking up, I let it become a message, and then a card at Christmas. I told myself I was giving him room. What I was doing was accepting the easiest available version of my brother, which was the one that required nothing from me. Our whole family did it. Ben's the reliable one. Ben's got it handled. Ben doesn't want to talk about it. We said all three of those sentences at the same funeral lunch, and none of us heard the problem. Meanwhile, our father, who was 83 years old and had buried his own wife, drove out to Ben's shop and did something about it. Dale told me the rest without knowing he was telling me anything. Frank said we had a fella who's out alone on service calls at night, an hour from anywhere, and if his truck goes in a ditch in January, nobody's expecting him anywhere till morning. Dale shrugged. That's the whole reason anybody's on the list. Somebody ought to notice you got home. That is not a father managing his son. That is a father solving a problem with the one tool he had that his son would accept, which was a piece of equipment and a job to do with it. The hauler came Saturday, as promised, and I was there at 7:30, which surprised my brother considerably. We were civil. That is the family disease and also, occasionally, a kindness. He carried out the drill press and the parts bins, and I stood in the driveway with a clipboard and wrote down what left the property because somebody should have been doing that since April. At about 10, I asked him for the receipts, the ones for whatever he had paid out of the estate. He did not want to. He went to the truck anyway, reached across the seat, and came back with a manila folder with his company name printed up in the corner, the kind he keeps invoices in. It's all in there, he said. Take it, count it. That's what you're good at. I let that one go by, which I would like credit for. I sat in my car with the folder on my knees and went through it in order, the way you do. Propane. The funeral home. A hardware receipt for the storm door. And behind the storm door receipt, folded twice with the crease pressed flat by everything stacked on top of it, a sheet of narrow-ruled spiral paper with a torn edge. 14 sets of initials down the left side. I went back up the driveway with the page in my hand and I did not manage it well. You took this out of his log. Ben set down the end of a workbench. The hauler's boy went and found something to do at the truck, the way young men do when two old people are about to say things. Yes, he said. That is the thing about my brother that nobody outside the family ever believes. He does not lie to your face. He arranges the world so you never get to the question, and then when you get there anyway, he answers it flat and stands there. Why? Because it's nobody's business. It's 14 people's business, I said. Marjorie Hoyt sat by that radio 2 Sundays in a row. Marjorie Hoyt has a telephone. Wendell Byers has a gravel road and a furnace that's older than my car. He wiped his hands on the rag and looked at the empty shelf, and for a second I thought he was going to say the true thing. He said the other thing instead. You want to talk about who called who? All right. His voice never came up. It got quieter, which is worse, and always has been. 18 months. He fell in the bathroom in February. I was there in 20 minutes. Emergency room in April. That was me. The catheter business in June. Me. The night he thought mother was in the kitchen. That was me. At 2 in the morning, and I had a rooftop unit in Waverly at 6. Where were you? Dim 1. 2 hours, Ben said. That's the whole distance. 2 hours. There is nothing to say to that. There is a version of me that would have found something, and I have been that version at other tables in other years, and I am not proud of what it cost. I stood there and took it, and it took longer than you would think. Then I asked about the money, because the money I could hold on to. He told me straight, $322 to the propane company, because the tank was at 9% and the house had to be kept above freezing until it sold. $418 to the funeral home, the balance on the marker. Both receipts were in the folder. Both were legitimate estate expenses, and if he had written them down anywhere, I would have signed off on them the same afternoon. $740. And the rest, I said. He did not answer that as fast. It's in the shop account. $510 of our father's estate is in your business account. It's not gone. I'm not stealing from you, Elaine, for God's sake. Then it goes on the inventory. It's $500, he said. It's a radio nobody wanted. It's not on the inventory, and it's not in the file, and I had to drive to Waterloo to find out it existed. He picked up the end of the workbench again, which is what my brother does instead of leaving the room, and we carried it out to the trailer together, 12 feet, in complete silence, and set it down, and neither one of us let go of it right away. Then he said, "You want to know what he was doing out here? Fine." I waited. "I'm not telling you." He said it without any weight at all. "It's not mine to hand you. Some of it isn't even about me. Ben, you had it in your hand 9 days ago." He straightened up and looked at me for the first time all morning. "You picked it up in there. You looked at it about that long, and you put it in your purse. It's typed." He typed it in July because his hands were going and he wanted it legible. I felt the blood go out of my face, and my brother watched it happen. "Go read the sheet, Elaine." I got about a mile down the blacktop before I pulled onto the shoulder and read it, with the door open and 1 foot on the gravel, which is not how you should read the last thing your father ever wrote to you. He had typed it on the Smith Corona, and you could see where the ribbon was going and where he had gone back over a letter to make it darker. At the top, he had put a date. The 19th of July. It began, "Elaine and Ben. Not dear anybody. Our father did not write dear." The first paragraph was housekeeping. The rig, the antenna, the 2 spare tubes, the guy wire he had bought and left under the bench. He said the equipment was worth something, and if the 2 of us wanted to sell it, that was our business. But that if we sold it, we should tell the group first, in person, and give them a Sunday to sort themselves out. That sentence cost my brother $1,250, and it took our father 1 line to write. The second paragraph is the one I have read the most times. He wrote that Ben was to have the equipment and the net, because Ben understood it and because the group already trusted him. Then he wrote this, and I am going to say it the way he said it. "Do not make a ceremony out of Ben. He will not stand for it. He came into this because he was alone too much, and I could not think of another way to ask, and it worked, and we are not going to discuss it." I sat there with my foot in the gravel. 6 years. My father had watched his son stop answering the phone, and instead of calling a family meeting, instead of saying anything to me, he had gone out to that shop and offered Ben a job. Not help, a job. Something with a schedule and 13 other people depending on it, because that was the only shape of care my brother would ever have accepted. And our father, who never once in my hearing used a word like grief, had understood that in about a week. And I had spent 6 years telling people my brother was doing fine, because it was the answer that let me hang up. The third paragraph was mine. Elaine keeps the telephone list. He had typed my name and then, evidently, thought about it, because underneath he had added 2 more lines. "She will do it right. There is not one of us who can keep a list right, and it has got to be somebody who will. I want to be careful here, because it would be very easy to tell you that I wept in that car, and the truth is I did not. What I felt was worse and quieter. My father had known exactly what I was good at. He had thought about it in July, at 89, with his hands going, and he had found the place in the thing where I fit. He just never asked me. And I understood, sitting there, why he had not, and it was not a mystery. You do not ask a person who has told you for 18 months that she has a lot going on. Ben carried the emergencies. I sent flowers and criticized the arrangements. Between the 2 of us, we had built a family where one person did everything and the other person had opinions, and neither of us could put it down because the resentment was the only thing we still shared. The rest of the sheet was the roster. Not a list of 14 names under 1 name at the top. 2 columns. And at the head of the left one, our father had typed the word coordinator, and then he had typed the same 14 names down the side, 1 for each week, in rotation, starting the first Sunday of January. Every single person on that list was scheduled to run it, including Wendell Byers, who was 84 and could not stand up. I want to be honest about what I thought I was doing for the next 8 days. I thought I was going to get the radio back. I had it worked out. I would pay Terry Holloway his $1,250, plus something for his trouble. I would put the Collins back on that shelf, and the thing would resume, and the fact that I had never in my life spoken on a radio would somehow arrange itself later. I drove out there on the 26th of October with a cashier's check in my purse. He had the garage door up and a work light on an extension cord, and the Collins was sitting on a bench with the covers off and a bag of new capacitors beside it, and there was a girl of about 16 sitting on a stool with a soldering iron, wearing safety glasses, doing the tedious part. That is his daughter. Her name is Nora. He had recapped the power supply. He had gone through it, and she had done the underside of the receiver herself, every joint, and she had made her first contact on it 11 days earlier to a man in New Brunswick, and she had written it in a logbook of her own with the date and the time and how strong he was. "I'll be straight with you," Holloway said. "He would not take the envelope out of my hand. He would not even look in it. If you'd called me the second week, I'd have said yes. My club's got a rig she could have used. But she's in it now. That's hers." I said some things about the estate. I said the word unauthorized more than once. He heard me out, and then he said, "Ma'am, I paid a fair price to a man with a paper, in cash, with a receipt, and I made 2 copies of it and gave you one before you asked. I took it to the lawyer on Monday because I am the sort of person who takes things to a lawyer. He was kind about it. He said the estate's quarrel was with Ben, not with the buyer. That unwinding a good faith sale would take months and cost more than the property was worth, and that a judge would want to know why the co-heir who signed the cleanout authorization did not read it. He asked me what I actually wanted. I said I wanted my father's radio back on the shelf. He let that sit there long enough for me to hear it. The week got worse from there, because while I was chasing one piece of equipment across Black Hawk County, the thing the equipment was for was coming apart. Harold Stang moved to his sons in Ames. He had been thinking about it for a year, and 3 weeks without a Sunday made the decision easy. Corinne Duffy told me not to call again, politely, and I understood it, because Corinne is up 4 times a night with her husband and cannot afford to hope about anything. Delbert Novak simply stopped answering, and Patty Nemmers told me he was fine, but that he had put the radio in the closet. 14 households on the 28th of September. On the 29th of October, I could account for 9. You cannot restore a thing like that by buying back the object at the middle of it. The object was never the thing. I had spent 8 days and a cashier's check learning what Dale Ruzicka told me for free in his kitchen. It was Marjorie who called me, in the end. The volunteer department in Hudson has a meeting room with a coffee maker and 30 folding chairs, and Dale's son-in-law is on the department, and they would open it up on a Sunday afternoon. "We'll all come," Marjorie said. "There's one condition, and it isn't mine, so don't argue with me about it." I already knew. "Both of you," she said, "or none of us." Before any of that, I sat on that shoulder for a while, and then I turned the car around and drove back to the house and put the torn page in my brother's truck, on the seat, under the sun visor clip where he keeps his work orders. I had a photograph of it on my phone. The estate record needed the page, not the paper. He needed the paper. That was the 18th of October, and it is the only thing I did that whole month that I would do again exactly the same way. For the meeting, I built a packet because that is what I have instead of a personality. 9 pages. The date of death, the date the advertisement went up, which was the day after the funeral, the bill of sale with the line about fully operational, the draft inventory with no radio on it, and a $300 entry for miscellaneous shop contents. The propane receipt, $322, legitimate. The funeral home receipt, $418, legitimate. And $510 that was still sitting in a heating and cooling company's checking account and on no document filed with the county. Then the log. 38 Sundays, 14 stations, 7 minutes apart, and the 4th column, and what the 4th column meant in February. I typed the 10th page twice. The first version explained why my brother's call sign was in that log more than anyone else's. Rachel. The year he did not answer the telephone. The service calls out on the county roads at night, and what our father had done about it without telling a soul, including me. Every line of it was accurate, and I could have backed all of it with paper. And I knew exactly what it would do in a room of 30 people who had lost their Sundays and wanted somebody to blame. They would have turned on him, or worse, they would have gone soft on him all at once, in public. And my brother would have gotten in his truck, and none of them would ever have seen him again. Do not make a ceremony out of Ben. I read that page 4 times, and then I selected it and deleted it and did not save the file. What I kept was one line. The net had a 14th station, and its operator is a member of this family, and he can tell you about that himself if he ever wants to. And if he does not, it is not yours, and it is not mine. Understand what that cost. The grief was the lever. It was the only one I had that would have moved my brother in front of witnesses, and I put it down, and after that, all I had was a 9-page packet and the hope that a 63-year-old man would do the right thing without being pushed into it. I also, that week, priced out what it would take to put a station back together. A modern transceiver, a power supply, a wire antenna and the hardware to hang it, coaxial cable, a battery backup for when the power goes down, which out there it does. About $1,800, installed by somebody who knew what he was doing. It comes out of my half. I want that on the record, and I do not want it admired. I called Ben on Thursday. I told him the date, the time, the room, and that Marjorie had set the condition, and that I was not going to argue with him about it. He said no. He said the group had a right to be angry, and he was not going to sit in a folding chair and be a lesson. On Sunday, the 9th of November, I got to the fire station 40 minutes early, put out the coffee, set 31 chairs, and watched the parking lot fill up without a white truck in it. At 2 minutes after 2, the door at the back of the bay opened. My brother came in with his hat in one hand and a folded sheet of narrow-ruled spiral paper in the other. There were 26 people in that room, and 4 of them had driven more than half an hour on a November Sunday to hear what had happened to a radio. I had the packet. I had the log in a plastic sleeve. I stood up and used none of it first, because I had decided somewhere around Waverly that if I opened with my brother's paperwork, the room would never hear anything else. So, I said this instead, and I said it looking at Marjorie Hoyt because she was the only one I could look at. For the last 18 months of my father's life, my brother did all of it. The falls, the hospital, the nights. I lived 2 hours away, and I sent flowers, and I had opinions about how he was handling it. In April, I signed a paper letting him clean out that house, and I never asked him what was in it. When the radio went missing, I came up here fast, and I want you to notice that. I could not manage 2 hours for a bathroom floor in February, and I managed 2 hours in one morning for an inventory. That is who I have been. I am not asking anybody to excuse my brother. I am telling you that I am the reason he was out there alone with it. Nobody said anything. Somebody's chair creaked. Dale Ruzicka looked at the floor with his arms folded, which from Dale is a standing ovation. Then Ben stood up in the back and did not come forward. I sold Dad's station on the 13th of October for $1,250, cash, to Terry Halloway out of Waterloo, he said. It worked fine. I told him it worked fine because it did, and then I told my sister it was junk, and that was a lie. 740 of it went to propane and the balance on the marker, and I've got the receipts. 510 of it has been sitting in my company account for 4 weeks, and it should have been on the county filing the day I took it. He walked up the middle aisle and put an envelope on the table in front of me. It had $510 in it and a deposit slip, and my brother's handwriting on the front, which said Estate of Frank Porter. And I told this room it was over, he said, by telling exactly one person who wasn't in this room, and then I let 3 Sundays go by. Wendell, I've been in your kitchen. There's no excuse for that, and I'm not going to build one. Wendell Byers said, no, there isn't. Then he said, sit down, Ben. He did not sit down. He unfolded the page from the log and set it on the table, and then he took the typed sheet out of his coat, his own copy, because our father had made 3. He read it out loud. All of it except one paragraph, which he started and then skipped, and I did not say a word, and there is not a person in that room who knows to this day what was in it. Then he read the roster, and that is when the room changed. I had thought it was a rotation. 14 names, 14 weeks, everybody takes a turn running the net. That was not what it was. Every name had 2 entries beside it. One was the household that person was responsible for calling if the net could not raise them. The other was the household responsible for calling him. Wendell Byers, 84, 3 quilts, could not get out of the chair, was down as second contact for Corinne Duffy, because Corinne is up all night anyway, and Wendell is awake at 4, and there is no shame in either fact. Nobody in that plan was only being taken care of. Not one. And down at the bottom, in the last row, our father had typed his own name in the left column like everybody else's. Ben put the sheet down and put both hands flat on the table. I'll go to the lawyer Tuesday, he said, and I'll sign whatever fixes the filing. He went Tuesday. I met him there, and we sat on the same side of a table for the first time since our mother's service. The lawyer amended the inventory. The station went on at its actual sale price, $1,250, with the bill of sale attached. The $740 in expenses went on as expenses, itemized, and I approved them without an argument because they were correct and because a person who has been wrong about the large thing should not go looking for small ones. The $510 was deposited into the estate account on the 11th of November and appears on the filing with a date and a number. Then the part my brother did not have to agree to. The limited authorization I signed in April was revoked in writing, and what replaced it says that no item leaving that property goes without both signatures, and that anything sold gets written down the same day, not later, not when somebody asks. He read it twice. He said, "That's fair." in the voice of a man for whom it was not entirely fair and who had decided not to say so. I want to be plain that this was not a punishment. My brother did not lose anything he should have had. He lost the ability to keep doing alone, a thing that was never supposed to be done alone, and it took our father dying and a radio getting sold for either one of us to notice that he had been doing it that way with our full and enthusiastic permission. The rest of it we settled in a fire station kitchen the same week. $1,800 out of my half. A transceiver, a power supply, wire and hardware for the antenna, cokes, and a battery box for when the lines come down, which out there they do about twice a winter. It is not Dad's Collins. It has a menu, and Dale Ruzicka has already said 3 unkind things about the menu. The equipment does not belong to me, and it does not belong to Ben. There is a 1-page agreement in a binder at that fire station, typed by me and read out loud before anybody signed it. The station is the property of the group. The coordinator rotates in the order our father typed in July. The sale or removal of any of it takes the group and not one person. The telephone list is kept current and checked every 90 days. Ben keeps the equipment running. That is written down. He said he wanted it in writing, which I have thought about a good deal since. I keep the list. There was one more thing, and I did not go looking for it. Terry Holloway called me on the 12th. His daughter had been thinking about it, apparently, since I stood in her garage saying the word unauthorized in front of her. Once a month, on the first Sunday, Nora Holloway will bring the Collins up on 3940 and check into the net. From Waterloo, on the same rig, with the same call in the log, run by a 16-year-old girl who solders better than her father does. I said yes before I had finished hearing the sentence, and then I had to sit down on the arm of a chair for a minute, which I did not explain to him. The first net under the new arrangement was set for the 16th of November at 7 o'clock, out of Ben's shop, because the fire station install was not finished, and my brother has a perfectly good station of his own that he has never once mentioned to me in 6 years. 14 households, 11 of them on the air, which left 3 that would not be on the air, and 1 telephone list, and 1 person whose entire assignment in our father's plan was to pick up a telephone and call them. I sat down at 6:40 with a pen, my father's address book, and my own hands not entirely steady, and I dialed the first number. Corinne Duffy answered on the 4th ring and said she could not talk long. I said I needed a minute. The net was back on at 7. I was the telephone, and I would be calling her every Sunday whether she came on the air or not. She was quiet. Then she said, "Every Sunday?" I said yes. She said, "All right then," and hung up on me, and I put a check mark beside her name and understood that I had just been given something. Harold Stang came on the air from Ames, which surprised everybody, including Harold. Delbert Novak was on. Patty had gotten the radio out of the closet on Thursday and made him plug it in, which is its own kind of check-in. At 7 o'clock, my brother called the net, and his voice on that speaker was a voice I had not heard since we were young. Not warmer, at work. Some people are only entirely themselves with a list in front of them, and it turns out that runs in the family on both sides. 7 minutes apiece. He did not rush anybody. At about 7:50, Marjorie Hoyt came on and told the whole net, the way she does, that she was glad to be doing this in November because she remembered last February. Ben asked her, "What about last February?" "Your dad didn't come up at 7, she said. "Never happened. Not once in 6 years. Delbert called for him twice, and I called the house, and it just rang. So I called you at 9 minutes after." There was a pause on the air of about 4 seconds, which on a radio is a long time. I was in Ben's shop 10 feet from him, with the telephone list on my knees. I watched my brother sit there with his hand on the microphone and not press it, because he had told me about that February, standing in a driveway with a rag in his hand as the first item in the ledger of everything he carried alone. He fell in the bathroom. I was there in 20 minutes. He had believed that for 9 months. He believed it at the funeral. 13 people noticed our father was not where he was supposed to be, and one of them picked up a telephone. That is the only reason my brother was in that bathroom in 20 minutes instead of the next morning. He pressed the microphone and said, "Copy that, Marge. Appreciate it." That is my brother's entire emotional vocabulary, and I have decided to accept it. Here is what the log actually says, now that it is finished. 14 people. Every one of them was being checked on by our father, and every one of them was checking on somebody else. At the bottom of the sheet, in the last row, our father's own name in the same column as everybody else's, because a man who spends 6 years building a thing so that no one person carries all of it does not then exempt himself from being carried. He did not get through his last winter alone either. He never said so, and neither of his children thought to ask. Ben and I are not fixed. I want to be honest about that, because I have heard plenty of stories that end with everybody crying in a kitchen, and I have never once seen it happen. We speak on the first Sunday of the month. We make estate decisions in writing. There are things I said in that driveway and things he said back that neither of us has taken off the table, and some of it will still be there when one of us dies. That is what it costs to be 67 and 63 and to have spent 30 years measuring each other by who showed up. But we both show up now, and it is scheduled. And scheduled turns out to be enough. If there is a name you have been meaning to call and you keep deciding it can wait until you have more time, call it this Sunday. That is the only thing I would ask anybody to take from this. And if the story was worth your afternoon, stay a while. There are more of them here. On the 7th of December, I sat down at 10 minutes to 7 with a new logbook, ruled into 4 columns in my handwriting, which is better than my father's and always was. 14 households, and I got all 14. 11 on the air, 3 on the telephone, and Corinne Duffy talked 6 minutes about her husband's medication, which is 5.5 minutes longer than she has ever given me. Then at 8:31, one more station came up that is not on anybody's roster yet, Waterloo. A Collins receiver and transmitter that a girl of 16 rebuilt with her own hands, a dozen miles from a shelf where the dust has long since closed back over the rectangle. I wrote her time and her call sign in the margin, because there is no row for her yet, and I intend to make one. Then I went back up the page. 14 check marks, and the 4th column empty all the way down.